In this lesson, we will learn the different methods to assign edge destruction effects. We will be covering the following: assigning a simple frayed edge, assigning an uneven frayed edge, assigning a grinding effect along an edge. For this lesson, you can download the BW file of the denim skirt or use the denim skirt which you have created previously. We have covered how to assign a simple frayed edge in the previous course. Let's have a quick recap. In vSwitcher, we ensure that the denim skirt has been loaded. We add the edge assignable trim which we would like to assign to the garment. We can add the first PSD file we created in the previous lesson. We use the Assign tool to assign the edge. Let's assign this trim to the top of the waistband. The image is too large and needs to be rotated. In the material context, we click on the image editor. Here, we reduce the size of the trim. We can adjust the height of the image to 1 centimeter. Next, we rotate the image by 180 degrees. Next, we enable Hide Background in the context view. And we adjust the color to match the fabric. Normally, we'd use the Overlay color blending mode. If we want the strands to be colored, we can use the Multiply color blending mode. We click on this arrow to apply a sync the face and back image of the trim. Remember that we can make any further adjustments to the trim using the Edit Externally option. For example, for this trim, the center part is too dark. This makes the repeat of the image in 3D not as seamless as we can see the darker patches. We can fix this in Photoshop. Once the image is loaded in Photoshop, we use the Quick Selection tool to select the darker parts of the image. In the adjustments, we select Curves. Now we can adjust the curves just for this part of the image. This looks great now. Since this is a PSD file, we can just save the file instead of merging the layers first. The trim will automatically be updated in vSwitcher. The trim looks more even now. Take some time to complete the edits on the edge effect. When assigning an uneven edge effect, we have a few extra steps to take note of. An example of an uneven effect would be the second effect we created in the previous lesson. We can add the effect as an edge assignable trim. Assign the trim to the hem of the garment. We need to resize the image. Let's adjust the resolution to about 30%. Then rotate the image by 180 degrees. As we can see, the top part of the effect is curved and not a straight line. In this case, when we enable Hide Background, the base fabric at the top would also be hidden. We uncheck Hide Background. For this, we need to create a cut mark. To do so, we use the pen tool to trace the shape of the effect. Before we do so, ensure we can use the texture tool to adjust the trim positioning. Drag along the edges to ensure the trim matches along the center front and center back of the patterns. Once the placement of the trim is as intended, we select the pen tool. We disable symmetry and start tracing. We'd like to emphasize that you should only start tracing once the placement of the trim has been confirmed. Tracing the effect does not have to be accurate. We just want to follow along the top, and we can overlap the effect slightly. Next, we select the lines and enable the cut mark in line properties. Pause the lesson here to finish adding the cut marks. In the Materials Resource tab, we add a blank PNG image as fabric. You can reuse the same blank PNG file that we provided in the previous lesson. Drag and drop the transparent fabric onto the lower part of the patterns. In the 3D window, we can see the bottom fabric is no longer visible. The next step is to ensure that we remove any seams and stitch construction on the invisible parts. Enable Edit Points on the Select tool. Then we click on the first point along the cut mark. In the context view, select Add Point to Edge. Now we can select the position of the added intermediate points and convert them to corner points. Next, remove the seams along the bottom edges. We want to ensure that the stitch construction is also changed to flat seam. We need to adjust the color to match the base fabric. In this case, we can edit the image externally and desaturate it. Adjust the contrast of the image using the curves adjustment, and save. Lastly, click on this arrow to apply the changes to the back of the trim. This looks great. Pause the lesson here to finish adding the blank image and removing the seams and stitch construction. Another example of edge destruction effects would be to add grinding effect along an edge. For this example, let's add that effect along the side seam. To do so, we first need to add a rectangular piece to stitch to the side seam. Multi-select these two edges along the side seam. Note the measurement on the context view. We insert a rectangle that is about 2 to 3 centimeters longer than the measurement and about 0.8 to 1 centimeter wide. Assign the blank fabric to this pattern. Next, multi-stitch the rectangle to the edges of the side seam. We adjust the 3D layer to be higher than the skirt patterns. We can add the pattern into the Arrange mode. And dress to simulate the piece. Pause the lesson to finish creating and simulating the rectangular piece. Next, we select the edge of the rectangle that is stitched to the skirt. In the context view, click Clone by Offset. We create an offset of -0.2 centimeters. In the Materials Resource pane, we load this image as an edge assignable trim. This image is available as a downloadable file. Instead of assigning this trim to the edge of the rectangle, we assign it to the internal line. If the seam is assigning to the wrong side of the internal line, assign it again, but place your cursor on the other side of the line. Next, we adjust the position of the trim in the context view. We want to create an irregular grinding effect. With the pen tool and edit points enabled, add several points along the internal line. Using the Select tool, we can adjust the position of the added points to adjust the placement of the trim. You can drag the points outside of the pattern to hide the trim on certain parts. Use the 3D window as a reference to achieve the look you want. And we are complete! Remember that the methods we shared are some of the possible ways. When working on other garments, think of how you can modify these steps to achieve the look you want. Let your creativity flow. In this video, you've learned how to assign various types of edge destruction effects.